Hey, can you take the neighborhood bulletin over? I asked my husband. However, he didn't even look at me. Truthfully, I didn't want to go next door. The wife was a kind person, but her husband always had a scary expression. Now that she was in the hospital for a checkup, he was the only one at home. I didn't want anything to happen, so I wanted my husband to go instead, but he wasn't listening. Reluctantly, I took the bulletin and went next door, ringing the doorbell. The door opened, and he appeared with a stern look on his face. I brought the neighborhood bulletin. Even when I said that, he didn't respond. On the contrary, he scanned the surroundings, as if checking if anyone was around. His actions gave me a bad feeling, and I tried to escape. But he grabbed my arm and pulled me into the house. "Stop it." But with a serious expression, he whispered in my ear.
"There's something I want to show you."
I had no idea what he meant. But when I saw it, I was thrown into utter despair. My name is Maddie. I met my husband Brian while working at a major company as a businesswoman. He seemed to fall for me at first sight, and immediately began pursuing me. He was an elite, having graduated from a prestigious university and landing a job at a big company, so he had absolute confidence in himself. Because of that, his arrogant attitude rubbed me the wrong way, and I couldn't get a good impression of him. I tried to subtly reject him, but he persisted, undeterred. In the end, I gave in and started dating him, which eventually led to marriage. I quit my job and moved into the apartment he had rented. I envisioned a happy life, but after the wedding, his attitude toward me became increasingly careless. For example, whenever I watched the news and shared an opinion, he would sneer at me and say,
"You don't understand anyway, so just stay quiet."
He belittled me. Sure, my education wasn't as good as his, and I wouldn't say I was particularly smart. But being mocked every time I spoke was incredibly painful. Still, since he was busy with work and often away, I managed to endure it. Plus, the birth of our beloved daughter Zara became my greatest joy. He also seemed genuinely happy about her birth, and his bad attitude toward me lessened somewhat. Although he never helped with the childcare, he acted like he knew everything and constantly gave orders. But nothing serious happened, and Zara grew up healthy, eventually becoming a grade schooler. At that point, the apartment we were living in started feeling cramped, so I suggested, "Zara's going to keep growing, and we should prepare a room for her. Let's move to a bigger apartment."
That's a good idea for once. I've been thinking about moving too. Let's get a house instead of an apartment.
Buying a house? Do we have the money for that?
That's not something for you to worry about. I'm the one earning the money, remember? If we buy a house, it'll boost my status at work too.
With that, he started looking for properties on his own. Even when I expressed my preferences.
You have no taste. I'll decide everything, so don't interfere.
He wouldn't listen to me. I felt uncomfortable and noticed he seemed anxious about something. It was a little while later when we decided on our new home. A 10-year-old house had just gone up for sale near our current apartment. When we went to see it, it was in a quiet residential neighborhood, and the 2-story house was clean both inside and out, so I really liked it. However, The price was a bit over our budget, so I begged my parents for help, and we finally set a date to move in. I couldn't wait, but for some reason, my husband had a troubled expression. Despite his initial confidence, he now seemed distant, giving half-hearted responses. "Hey, you've been looking down lately. Is something wrong?"
Nothing.
That was all he would say. However, I interpreted his change in attitude as a positive thing, thinking he was simply feeling the pressure of having to pay the mortgage. "Hey, I'm thinking of getting a job. Zara doesn't need as much attention anymore."
Sure, why not?
Hoping to relieve some of his pressure, I started working part-time. With my parents' support and no time to worry about his attitude, I tried to focus on my new routine. Fortunately, both the house and the surrounding environment were wonderful. There weren't any noisy neighbors, and there were many children who attended the same school as Zara. The local community welcomed us warmly, and I had no concerns about our life here. Best of all, our neighbor was kind and often helped us. She was a big woman who drank frequently, with streaks of gray in her hair, and always laughed loudly. She seemed to be well liked in the neighborhood, known for being a helpful lady. On the day we moved in, she came over and spent about an hour talking to us about the local community and neighborhood relationships. Her children had already left the nest, and she now lived with her retired husband. She called it her retirement life and would often come over to give Zara little snacks as gifts. Zara adored her, running to her excitedly whenever she visited, eager to talk about school and her friends. While she was lovely, her husband was different. In contrast to his sociable wife, he was a quiet man with short, graying hair and tanned skin. His brow was always furrowed deeply, and his mouth set in a straight line. He had the appearance of an old-fashioned, stubborn father, and when I greeted him, he barely responded, often glaring silently. He was small in stature but had an overwhelming presence that even the other neighbors seemed to avoid. According to his wife, he used to work in construction and now enjoyed gardening in his retirement. She laughed heartily, saying he was just shy, but I couldn't shake my discomfort around him. My husband felt the same way. One day, he came home complaining.
"Hey, what's with that guy next door?"
"What happened?"
"Nothing. But he keeps glaring at me from a distance. It's creepy. I don't want to get involved with people like him. You shouldn't get too close either."
Sure, he was scary, but his wife was genuinely kind. Sometimes, Zara would go over to their house to play. Honestly, I was worried about her being there with him, but I figured it was fine if his wife was around. Besides, with my part-time job keeping me busy, I was grateful for the help. My husband wasn't involved in parenting, and my parents lived far away, so I couldn't rely on them. That's why I depended on our neighbor. Thankfully, no incidents occurred, and the days passed peacefully. But little changes began to emerge in our lives. One day, after coming home late from work, I found the house empty. After waiting a while, Zara came home looking guilty. "Hey, Zara, you've been coming home late recently. What have you been doing?"
"Nothing. I've just been at a friend's house."
She avoided eye contact. In the past, She would come straight home from school, eager to tell me all about her day. Her change in behavior planted a seed of unease in my heart. What's more, she had been going over to the neighbors even when the wife wasn't there, meaning she was spending time alone with him. Worried, I tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen and started avoiding me. She also became strangely reluctant to change her clothes in front of me, quickly dressing in secret. It wasn't just Zara who had changed. My husband also started coming home unusually early. His mood and behavior, which had been off during the move, seemed to be getting worse. As soon as he got home, he would flop onto the couch, staring at his phone. "You've been busy, but is it okay to come home so early?"
It's just a slow period. What, do you not want me around?
Even though he was home, he didn't help with anything. His constant bad mood made it suffocating to be around him. Zara seemed scared of him, avoiding being in the same room and retreating to her own. Worried, I approached my husband about Zara's behavior. "Hey, Zara's been acting strange lately. Do you know anything?"
How should I know? You deal with it.
"Can't you talk to her?"
Stop nagging.
He completely brushed me off and, looking annoyed, shut himself in his room. This exchange became a common occurrence. Each time, my husband would either lock himself in his room or leave the house. It seems that Zara is avoiding Brian as well, spending time either in her room or at Julie's house. As a result, when I return home from my part-time job, I eat dinner alone in an empty living room. We bought this house to make life easier for everyone, yet I realize now that our family is falling apart. I would have been better off if we had stayed in that apartment, I think to myself. Normally, the three of us would sit around the table for meals, but now, I'm the only one left at the dining table. Sitting on the cold, hard, wooden chair, I idly reflect on how things have changed. Days passed in gloom, and soon it was the weekend. Although both Brian and Zara were at home, the atmosphere remained as cold as ever, with no sign of family interaction. I suddenly remembered that I needed to deliver the neighborhood circular. It had to be taken to Julie's house, but Julie wasn't home. She had apparently been flagged for excessive drinking during a health checkup and had to be hospitalized for further tests. Julie had specifically told me this, though I could sense a certain sadness in her voice, as if there was something more she wanted to say but couldn't. Her face, which usually lit up with a beaming smile, was uncharacteristically shadowed. I hope it's not something too serious, I thought, but I couldn't bring myself to ask more. We parted ways awkwardly. Now, only Philip was at home, and I still felt uncomfortable around him. So, I decided to ask Brian to take the circular instead. "Hey, could you take the circular over?"
No way. You go do it.
But I don't like him.
What are you talking about? Julie will be there, right?
She's in the hospital now.
Don't lie. You're just trying to get out of it. Just go already.
Brian seemed convinced that Julie was at home. "I told you, she's not there."
Shut up. You're always talking nonsense. You'll probably end up chatting for ages anyway. Just go.
There was no point in arguing any further. Brian was lying on the sofa, staring at his phone, not even looking in my direction. Realizing it was a waste of time, I decided to take the circular myself. As I was about to leave, Zara called out to me from behind.
Mom, are you going out?
When I turned around, I saw Zara peeking out from behind the staircase wall, half of her face visible. I'm just dropping off the circular. I'll be right back.
I want to come with you.
What? Julie's not there, so it won't be any fun. I'll be back soon. Despite my words, Zara refused to listen.
No, I want to go.
I said no. Be a good girl and wait here. I'll play with you when I get back. I was already tired from the pointless argument with Brian. The last thing I needed was to deal with Zara's whining too. She clung to me until the last moment, but I gently reassured her and left the house. Just as I locked the door behind me, I thought I heard Brian yelling faintly. But since he's not one to raise his voice, I shrugged it off and headed next door. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. After a moment, Philip appeared, looking as sour as ever. I brought the circular. I handed it over, but Philip didn't reach for it. He just glared at me in silence, then leaned out slightly, scanning the area around the house. There was no one in sight. His strange behavior made me even more uneasy. Is something wrong? I was trying to hand the circular over quickly and leave, but suddenly, Philip grabbed my arm. What are you doing? I was so scared that my voice came out in a whisper. Philip ignored my words and, with incredible strength, began dragging me inside the house. I struggled with all my might, but I was no match for his strength. I was helplessly pulled into the entryway. Please, stop. My body trembled with fear, but it seemed like Philip was focused on something else.
Be quiet. Come with me.
Philip spoke in a low voice, dragging me by the arm, still wearing his shoes, to the back door. He led me outside and around to the yard. There was a block wall and a hedge between my house and Philip's, making it impossible to see either house from the other. I had no idea why Philip was doing this, but I had no choice but to follow. Philip stopped in front of a small hole in the hedge, just big enough for a child to fit through. He stuck his head through the hole, as if checking something. Then, he pulled back and looked at me.
Look through here.
I had no idea what was going on, but I did as I was told and peered through the hole. I could see my house's yard and even part of the living room through the open curtains. Inside, Brian and Zara were talking, though I couldn't hear what they were saying. What caught my attention, though, was how strange their interaction seemed. Brian was talking to Zara, but since his back was to me, I couldn't see his face. Zara, however, had a look of pure fear on her face. Suddenly, Brian grabbed Zara's shoulder and pushed her. What? I whispered to myself. But that wasn't the end of it. Brian raised his hand and struck Zara, who was lying on the floor crying. Zara's face was red with tears as she tried to crawl away, but Brian grabbed her clothes and hit her again. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Brian had never been a great husband, but he had never once raised his hand against Zara before. I stood there, frozen, unable to speak, my hand covering my mouth.
I wanted you to see this. You wouldn't believe me if I just told you.
Startled by Philip's words, I looked up at him. His face was twisted in fury as he glared at Brian through the hedge, veins bulging at his temples. Could it be Zara? Overwhelmed with concern for Zara, I left Philip behind and rushed back to the house. As soon as I opened the door, I heard Brian shouting,
Go ahead, tell your mom. See what happens.
At the same time, I heard Zara sobbing. I ran to the living room without even taking off my shoes. There, I saw Zara lying on the floor, with Brian towering over her. I rushed to Zara and cradled her small body in my arms.
Oh, you're back.
Brian seemed surprised to see me home. I glared at him with all the anger I could muster. What the hell is going on here? But Brian showed no sign of remorse and just shrugged.
What? It's discipline. Zara was misbehaving.
I looked down at Zara's face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head. That was all the confirmation I needed. Zara, go to Philip's house. I'll be fine. Zara ran out of the house.
What? I'm the bad guy here. It's your bad parenting that made her like this.
You've never even helped with raising her, so how can you say that? My words seemed to hit a nerve.
Shut up. You think you can talk to me like that when you're nothing? I'm sick of being treated like a fool by everyone.
Brian charged at me, and in my fear, I ducked down. Brian tripped on the carpet and fell towards me, our foreheads colliding with a loud thud.
Ouch! What the hell are you doing?
Brian shoved me away while holding his forehead. I stumbled, overwhelmed by the sudden impact, and collapsed onto the floor. Brian's face turned red, his eyes bloodshot, and he glared at me while breathing heavily through his shoulders.
I won't forgive you anymore.
Muttering those words, he lifted a wooden chair and aimed it at my head. Dizzy, I couldn't get up or escape. This is it, I thought, resigning myself to my fate, and squeezed my eyes shut tightly. My only wish was for Zara to be safe. But at that moment, the front door burst open, and a thunderous voice echoed through the house. Surprised, I opened my eyes to see that Brian, too, was taken aback. In an instant, the living room door swung open, and there stood Philip.
Who the hell are you? How dare you barge in here?
Shut up. Do you even realize what you're doing? You should be ashamed of yourself.
Without hesitation, Philip charged at Brian.
Don't you dare lecture me, you lowlife.
Brian roared angrily and hurled the chair with all his strength at Philip. It struck Philip square in the face. He recoiled for a moment, but unfazed, he lunged at Brian, grabbing hold of him.
Stop it. Let go of me.
Brian struggled desperately, trying to wriggle free from Philip's grasp, but he couldn't budge. Philip hoisted Brian into the air and slammed him down hard onto the floor. He then pinned Brian down, twisting his arm behind his back.
It hurts. Stop, please.
Brian screamed in agony, trying to escape, but Philip had him locked in a hold, unable to move.
Maddie, call the police now.
A large bruise had formed on Philip's forehead where the chair had hit him. My dizziness had subsided a bit, so I stood up and immediately dialed the police. Even as we waited for them to arrive, Philip didn't release Brian. 10 minutes later, the police arrived, and Brian was taken into custody. Philip and I, both injured, were taken to the hospital by ambulance as a precaution. Zara, who had escaped to the neighbor's house, was left in the care of a nearby mom friend. While on the way to the hospital, Philip explained the situation. Zara had confided in Philip and Julie about Brian's violence about a month ago. At first, neither of them believed her. They knew us well and couldn't imagine domestic violence in our home. They assumed Zara was sulking after being scolded by her parents. But one day, while Philip was tending to his garden, he happened to witness Brian's abuse through the hedge. That was when they finally realized Zara was telling the truth. However, Zara seemed afraid of Brian finding out that his violence had been exposed to me. When they pressed her for more details, Zara revealed that Brian had threatened her, saying he would do even worse things to me if she told me. Philip and Julie were torn. They considered going to the police but weren't sure if outsiders' words would be taken seriously. Besides, if the police came to our house, Brian would likely lie his way out of trouble. If that happened, they feared Brian's violence towards Zara would escalate. Philip wanted to tell me, but Brian was always at home, and I was often out working part-time, so the opportunity never arose. Time passed, and both Philip and Julie grew increasingly frustrated and anxious. Today, they finally got the chance they had been waiting for. Philip was prepared to risk his own life to protect us if necessary.
I should have acted sooner. I'm truly sorry.
After finishing his explanation, Philip bowed deeply in apology. Please, you don't have to apologize so much. I'm just as guilty for not noticing what was going on. I felt disgusted with myself for being so oblivious. In hindsight, Zara had been giving me signs all along. Even Julie had subtly tried to warn me. But I ignored it all and went on living my carefree life. I'm more sorry for causing you injury. I hope it's not serious.
Oh, this? It's nothing. I dealt with worse when I was younger.
He smiled as he said this, and for the first time, I saw a different side of him. My impression of Philip changed significantly in that moment. While we were being examined at the hospital, Julie arrived.
I heard what happened. It sounds awful. Poor thing.
Julie had been in the hospital for a routine checkup and, upon hearing from the nurses that Philip had arrived, rushed over. Thank you so much for protecting Zara, I said. Julie shook her head sadly.
No, we couldn't do anything. If we were younger, we would have been able to act sooner. Getting old really stinks.
When I told her about Philip dragging me into the house, Julie laughed loudly.
Oh, I'm sorry. That man is so bad with words. He still tries to act cool, even at his age. He must have scared you. I'm so sorry.
Hearing Julie's hearty laugh made all the fatigue of the day melt away. Luckily, our injuries weren't serious. However, as the police investigation began, Zara underwent an examination at the hospital. It turned out that she had numerous bruises hidden under her clothes, evidence of the continuous abuse she had endured. Brian was arrested, and I was questioned as a possible accomplice. But thanks to testimonies from Julie and others, my innocence was quickly proven. As the police dug deeper into Brian's life, more of his secrets came to light. It turned out that Brian had quit his job long ago, around the time we decided to buy our house. His abrasive personality had caused him to become increasingly isolated at work. Having never faced failure before, Brian refused to admit his faults. When he was accused of mistreating a junior employee, it escalated into a major scandal within the company. Fearing that the issue would become public, the company tried to resolve it by transferring Brian to a remote location. But his pride wouldn't allow him to accept the demotion, and he refused. Angered, the higher-ups fired him. Unable to face me, Brian kept his unemployment a secret, fearing I would gain the upper hand in our relationship. He thought he could find a new job quickly, but that didn't happen. Desperate, Brian turned to gambling as an escape. At first, he won and managed to pass it off as his salary, but recently, he'd been losing. To cover the losses, he borrowed money. Having hit rock bottom, Brian took out his frustrations on Zara. I was overwhelmed with shame. If only he had confided in me sooner, we might have found a solution. But it was too late. Brian went to prison, and I divorced him. His parents apologized to me and took on his debts, paying me alimony as well. For now, I'll be able to get by financially, with support from my own parents as well. At first, Zara seemed shocked, but thanks to the people around her, she soon started smiling again. I considered moving, but Zara didn't want to leave. She said that staying here meant having Julie and Philip close by, and her school friends lived nearby too. So, we stayed. Julie is still in good health, and she dotes on Zara like her own grandchild. Since that day, Philip has also started greeting me with a warm smile. At one point, I didn't know how things would turn out, but everything is now resolved. I'm grateful to the people around us and living a peaceful life. How was today's story? Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.